about you, Sue Bradford? Is there a memory that comes to mind? A young Sue growing up, what would you gravitate to?
I'd love to know what Sue read.
I was reading voraciously from 5, and libraries have always been my home and place of sanctuary. Still are. I love reading and encourage it among everybody I know, including children and grandchildren.
Oh, wonderful. So finally, before you leave us, Alan, what do you hope to bring to the role?
Basically, I want to amplify what awesome work is already going on out there, whether it's in schools, whether it's in prisons, whether it's in libraries. I want to amplify, find the people who are doing the awesome mahi on the ground and give them like a voice. I want to amplify what everyone's doing and then connect them with other people who are doing the same thing and just let the passion flow.
We'll keep in touch with you, Alan. Kia ora. Congratulations on the role.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Alan Dingley, the forthcoming Te Awhi Reto Reading Ambassador. We've had Sue Bradford and Nick Leggett this afternoon. You've both been A+. 10 out of 10, even for you, Nick Leggett, let me tell you.
Oh, thank you, Wallace. I feel so much better now.
Maybe an 8. Anyway, I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next. I'm back with you tomorrow, 3:45. I'll see you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, trumped up charges, reverse racism and a witch hunt by the loony left. America's 45th president and the first to face felony charges lashes out. We're live to the US. The Reserve Bank governor goes hard, supersizing the official cash rate beyond expectations. A cost of dying crisis is robbing some low-income families of a dignified farewell for their loved ones. We talk to the Funeral Directors Association. Hopping off on an Easter roadie, Waka Kotahi's here with the need to knows. And time after time, he'd obsessed over Cyndi Lauper. And then there she was in his Dunedin pub. True story. We'll have all the details. You can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Ai Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The National Party has labelled the latest interest rate hike a punch in the guts and criticised the government's response as a mere band-aid. The Reserve Bank has raised the official cash rate by 50 basis points to 5.25%, double what was expected. National's Nicola Willis confronted the Finance Minister in the debating chamber this afternoon.
Does he understand that his band-aid policies mean very little to a family who will be searching for more than $300 more every week?
I find it interesting that the member thinks that lifting the incomes of the lowest earning New Zealanders is a band-aid solution.
Grant Robertson says the government will continue to make savings where it can. The former US President Donald Trump has launched a blistering attack on the prosecutor who charged him with 34 counts of falsifying business records. Speaking at his Florida residence hours after he entered not guilty pleas in New York, he denied wrongdoing and demanded the resignation of Alvin Bragg. From Washington, Simon Marks reports.
Donald Trump was determined to have the last word on Tuesday, and it was blistering. Back at home in Florida, he launched a fresh assault against Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney who's brought the history-making charges against him.
The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information.
He also attacked the judge overseeing his case, calling him and his family anti-Trump. It's a scorched earth policy, but it's risky. Prosecutors could bring fresh charges against the former president for attempting to disrupt their proceedings.
The Funeral Directors Association is calling on the government to increase the funeral grant for low-income families so they can bury their dead without having to go into debt. Chief Executive Gillian Boyes says the work and income grant of nearly $2,500 was set too low 20 years ago. She says even a simple service costs on average $6,500. A top-level task force has made 54 recommendations to try to turn around what it calls dire childhood immunisation rates. The immunisation task force was convened last year after the rates for children 5 and under hit record lows. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The task force highlights the worst rate in the country. Just 34% of Māori children in South Auckland are fully vaccinated. In its first report released today, it says the system is failing them and other children in vulnerable communities. It says it's haphazard and only works for those with the resources to access care. The task force wants to create more vaccinators, improve rates for pregnant women and go out to vaccinate some children rather than wait for them to turn up to clinics.
The government has asked doctors and midwives to make vaccinating pregnant women an immediate priority after 3 babies died from whooping cough. The Health Minister, Aisha Verrall, says she is extremely concerned about the situation. And Consumer New Zealand says the total bill for customers from ongoing Cook Strait ferry cancellations could run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Bluebridge has cancelled sailings of its Strait Feronia vessel for the 3rd day in a row with engineering problems, and it's not known when it will be back in service. And the Inter-Islanders Kaitaki has not been running for more than a month because of a faulty gearbox. Consumers Chief Executive John Duffy says that ferry companies legally must offer affected passengers compensation.
If a sailing is cancelled and it's within the control of the ferry operator, and then you're forced to spend money on accommodation or getting an alternative way across the strait, you can claim those costs back from the ferry operators.
John Duffy wants the Commerce Commission to investigate the companies to ensure they're giving people what they're owed. In sport, a 5-wicket haul to Adam Milne and a half-century to Tim Seifert has guided the Black Caps to a 9-wicket win over Sri Lanka in the second T20 International in Dunedin. The win levels the 3-match series at 1-1. Sri Lanka posted a below-par total of 141 with fast bowler Milne taking 5 for 26. Chad Bowes then got the Black Caps run chase off to a flying start with 31 off 15 balls, and when he was dismissed, Tim Seifert continued the onslaught. He finished 79 not out off just 43 balls, including 6 sixes. The series decider is in Queenstown on Saturday. And New Zealand Rugby has set an ambitious goal of doubling the number of women and girls playing the sport over the next decade. The NZR's identified barriers keeping women and girls off the field and out of rugby boardrooms, as Felicity Reid reports.
Last year, more than 24,000 women and girls were registered and playing rugby in New Zealand. By 2033, the aim is to have 50,000 players. In the next 10 years, NZR also want to increase women in governance to at least 40% across all levels of the game. The targets are outlined in the Women and Girls in Rugby strategy launched in Auckland today. To get where they want to go, rugby will have to shake a few stereotypes. More than a quarter of current participants highlighted the judgmental environment and culture of rugby, making it difficult for women and girls to engage. This year, the NZR will invest over $21 million in female rugby as they look to capitalise on the success of last year's Rugby World Cup.
That's the news.
Accolades for former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
You can't help feeling sad about her going. Leaders like Jacinda don't come along too often.
The circus around the indictment of Donald Trump.
I've never seen quite the number of press and police outside of a courthouse in New York before. It is an absolute madhouse.
And concerns as the OCR is tipped to head higher.
Let's be really clear. I mean, we're seeing huge pain and suffering going on across New Zealand, and it's going to get worse.
News as it happens. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, fine today, scattered rain tomorrow, possibly heavy in the north. Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, mostly fine, a few spots of rain tomorrow evening. Waikato and Bay of Plenty to Kapiti, including the Central High Country. Also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly fine with increasing cloud tomorrow, but isolated showers in the west from Waipomo to Kapiti. Wellington Wellington and Waded Upper mostly fine, scattered showers developing tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Rain with heavy falls about Westland and Fiordland, with thunderstorms possible today, but only a few showers about Bulla. Rain or showers clearing by tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with scattered rain developing, but only a morning shower or two about Nelson. Otago and Southland, showers spreading north this evening, then clearing from central Otago tomorrow. And looking at Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, a few showers. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A punch in the guts for Kiwis. Reining in inflation is coming at a cost for the average New Zealander with a mortgage. The Reserve Bank is surprised with a 50 basis point rise in the official cash rate to 5.25%, but left it vague about future possible tightening. The increase was larger than expected as the bank said inflation remained too high and the labour market too stretched. Amy Williams reports.
More austerity is ahead for those keeping up with the rising cost of living and mortgage repayments. Mortgage broker Malcolm Knight says today's OCR rise is more than the expected 25 basis point nudge.
It's heavier than I would have thought we needed to go. And again, I just wish there was a slightly slower absorption of the repricing of the mortgages that are in flight. Like 0.5, I don't know anyone that was really expecting it to go quite that sharply today.
He says first home buyers and solo parents needing to refix on higher rates are feeling the pressure.
The tough conversations are really with those that are on predominantly single incomes. So, it's really like the solo mums, etc., with modest mortgages even of $300,000 that are suddenly saying when they're repricing, I don't know how I'm going to find another $250 a fortnight. We haven't got that in our budget and I don't know what I'm going to cut.
The government requires inflation to be between 1% and 3%, and increasing the OCR in turn results in interest rates rises and helps bring inflation down. At just over 7%, inflation is crippling household budgets.
My mortgage cost will definitely go up, and obviously the cost of everything else will go up, so life gets more expensive.
I can see it like every week when we go to groceries, shopping and everything. Yes, big difference from last year and from 2 years ago as well.
Yeah, it's harder to know how much savings I'm going to have at the end of the week because I want to put a certain amount in, but if I put a certain amount in, I'm going to have to take more out.
Today's rise brings the OCR to its highest level since late 2008. CoreLogic chief economist Calvin Davidson says today's hike shows the Reserve Bank is playing a tough game on inflation.
Most people were anticipating 0.25, but it still doesn't come as a massive surprise to see a 0.5 because the Reserve Bank has been talking a pretty tough game on inflation and they're very keen to stamp that out.
With half of mortgage borrowers on fixed rates that are due to be repriced in the next 12 months, he says remaining employed is the key.
It's quite a big wave of people still coming through. They're looking at a fairly large change in interest rates still, even if actual market rates have peaked. So there's still a challenge out there, but interest rates are at least peaking and we're seeing employment stay high. So that does give people a buffer.
Malcolm Knight says banks are now stress testing new lending at closer to 9%.
The affordability is definitely reduced. People that could be approved for $1 million previously, is coming down towards $750. Those larger loan sizes are not going out the door quite as quickly.
Economists now expect the OCR to peak at 5.5, with another 25 basis point rise at the next update in May.
To the US now, where some might have mistaken former President Donald Trump for starring in a new reality TV show today. It all began with an historic court appearance in Manhattan. Mr. Trump entered not guilty pleas to 34 criminal charges stemming from allegations he paid hush money to women to shut down allegations of extramarital affairs during the 2016 election campaign. In New York, District Attorney Alvin Bragg made it clear that no one is above the law.
At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
After his arraignment, Mr. Trump flew back to Florida, where he held an event with supporters at his Mar-a-Lago resort. The defiant former president then took to the stage to launch an extraordinary attack against the judge and head of the prosecution.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information, for which he should be prosecuted, or at a minimum, he should resign.
It is 12 minutes after 5. Kia amo tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. With the Easter weekend and school holidays just days away, things aren't looking good for those trying to cross the Cook Strait. For the third day running, one of Blue Bridge's ferries has been stuck sitting in the dock with engineering troubles, leaving passengers with refunds but no way to rebook. It follows more than a month of cancellations of the Inter-Islanders Kaitaki sailings while it fixes a dodgy gearbox. Our reporter Lauren Crimp and cameraman Angus Drever have the story.
At the Wellington Blue Bridge terminal, a group of 25 German tourists zipping their way down Aotearoa on a motorbike tour hit an unplanned stop sign last night. They were meant to get on the ferry at 2 o'clock this morning and wake up in the South Island.
Yeah, really annoying because yesterday evening we didn't know what we should do and it was all chaos.
They've rebooked on the Inter-Islander. On top of the Strait Feronia's cancellation, the morning sailing of the Blue Bridge's other ship, the Connemara, was delayed around 5 hours. Passenger Perry O'Carroll says he's used to it.
About a month ago we went across and the same thing happened. It was a 3-hour delay, so it's all part of the business, I suppose.
So it's just kind of become standard practice if you're catching the ferry that you kind of expect a delay or a cancellation?
Yeah.
On the other side of the strait, many picked-in accommodation providers are full as people scramble to make alternative plans. Eldan Lodge motel supervisor Melissa Huntley says tensions are rising.
It has been hectic, like we're fully booked and then we get abused and it's not our fault, we're trying to do the best we can, but we're just getting sick of it because it's just constant. Every day there is something.
And Piwaka Lodge and Backpackers owner Nikki Fitzgerald says the town is packed.
We've had people on couches and storerooms and all sorts of things, and a lot of friends and family have sort of pitched in with lounges and things just so that, everyone's got a bed. But the big thing we've found is just the lack of communication.
In a statement, Blue Bridge spokesperson Will Dady says he's disappointed and apologises to passengers. He says those on cancelled sailings will be given a full refund, but there's no room to rebook. The company will deal with those who have incurred additional costs on a case-by-case basis. Consumer New Zealand's chief executive, John Duffy, wants people to know they're entitled to more than just a refund or rebooking under the Consumer Guarantees Act.
If a sailing is cancelled and it's within the control of the ferry operator, and then you're forced to spend money either on accommodation or getting an alternative way across the strait, you can claim those costs back from the ferry operators.
Transport Minister Michael Wood has continued to blame the previous government for not investing in new vessels sooner. Labor did, but the first isn't due here until 2025. Wellington Mayor Tori Whanau says construction takes time, but she'll put pressure on the government.
I support the organisations for the work that they're doing, and I will continue working or lobbying central government to see if we can get more assistance for that. But it's an incredibly crucial project for our city.
While the Inter-Islanders Kaitaki won't be at sea until at least next week, there's no word yet whether the Blue Bridge's Strait Feronia will be up and running in time for Easter holidaymakers to jump aboard.
Well, let's go back to New York now and Donald Trump's court appearance. We're joined by CNN's Mike Valerio. Hi, Mike. No Melania or Ivanka at Donald Trump's court appearance. So what kind of support was there for him today?
Well, I would say, Lisa, first of all, good morning, early morning from here in Lower Manhattan. There were hundreds of Trump supporters who were in front of the courthouse who were rallying to the president's cause. It was pretty arresting to hear from a supporter, for example, who spoke to us, who said that he was at the Capitol on January 6th and called it awesome. He said that he would be with the president for all of his battles, be it legal or anything else, for this latest presidential campaign season. So it was quite a scene in front of the courthouse as his next chapter of American history is forged here in New York.
So talk us through a bit more of the detail around the charges. Okay, we knew about allegations relating to Stormy Daniels, the adult movie star, but there is more information about other claims involving a doorman. What else can you tell us?
Yeah, so the doorman was kind of a monkey wrench thrown into this indictment. Bottom line, we've known about the Stormy Daniels story since 2018. Mr. Trump was charged with 34 counts of falsifying business records. But what's different here is that from the point of view of the prosecutor in New York, this isn't just falsifying business records, making an error in your business accounting. These charges say that the former president did that, falsified those records, to undermine the integrity of the 2016 presidential election, to make it easier for him to win. That legal argument has never been made before in this context. So what you were mentioning about the doorman and this illegitimate child is that prosecutors here in New York sort of stunned all of us members of the press by showing the earliest example of how Mr. Trump and his orbit are accused of paying off this tabloid here in the United States to kill a story that would have been damaging to the president's campaign about a doorman who knew of an affair that turned out not to be true in the least bit. This doorman was saying there was a cleaning woman who had a love child with the president. So this tabloid paid $30,000 during the presidential campaign season to buy the rights for this story and never published it. So prosecutors here laid that out in their court papers as the first example of this strategy to pay this money, not account for it properly, and by extension, undermine the integrity of the 2016 presidential process.
So what happens now?
Oh my gosh, what happens now? We have all of these attempts by Trump's lawyers to try to, first of all, throw this case out of court because it's an unusual series of legal arguments that the prosecutors here are using, or at the very least to lessen the severity of these charges. But this is a months-long process. The next court date for Mr. Trump, where he has to appear in person here in New York, is set for December 4th. And in January, that's when the presidential primary process begins in the United States. So for anybody, in New Zealand thinking, oh, is there going to be a trial soon? No, there's not going to be a trial soon. We're looking into next year, but that's really when the presidential process begins. So buckle your seatbelts.
Good to talk to you, Mike. That's CNN's Mike Valerio there on Donald Trump's appearance at a Manhattan court today. Back home, there's a cost of dying crisis for low-income families, according to the Funeral Directors Association. It claims some are unable to farewell their loved ones with dignity, respect, and in keeping with basic human and cultural rights because of rising costs. On April 1st, the Work and Income Funeral Grant increased 7% to $2,445, but that doesn't come close to covering a funeral. CEO of the Funeral Directors Association, Gillian Boyes, is with us now. Kia ora, Gillian. Can you just give us an idea, what is the cost for a basic funeral?
Okay, look, something really basic, perhaps with a cremation, would be about $6,500 on average. Something with a burial might be upwards of $8,500. So, yeah, a long way away from that $2,400 figure that you mentioned.
What are the elements of that price? Because that is pricey. So $6,500 around about for a cremation, you're not even buying a plot. So what are you buying?
Well, actually you are. So when funeral directors charge their fee, what they're doing is they're consolidating all the costs into one invoice for the convenience of the family. So that fee will include your burial and cremation costs, so your plots, your interment, any cremation costs, for instance. It'll include your casket, that's another big cost, and it includes the professional fee that the funeral director charges, plus all the disbursements. So if you've got flowers, newspaper notices, celebrant, all of those things are included within that cost.
So you mentioned the casket there, which can be expensive, but what are the other most expensive elements? I mean, who is getting the most out of those prices?
Yeah, so the big three probably are the often a council cost for the burial plot or cremation plot. So that's a big one. The casket is one of the big ones, and then the professional fee for the funeral director is one of the big ones, and that covers all of the work that they do, planning the funeral, receiving those instructions, doing all the transfers of the body, running the funeral itself, all the post-funeral care, doing all of the paperwork, etc. So those are the big three. But then, your catering costs could be really up there if you want to have something quite lavish, etc. Yeah.
So, okay, if you need to trim, what do you do then? Because you're talking about this work and income grant. It's less than $2,500. Can you buy any kind of farewell for that money? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so look, I've talked to some of our funeral directors who deal a lot with families in this case, but oftentimes the families may be Māori and they are perhaps taking the body back to the marae, so they still require embalming, they still require that transfer and the work around the paperwork, they still require a basic casket. So even those sort of minimal things are probably going to be somewhere in the $5,000 range. And then, so there's not a lot to cut out from there. I mean, there's things you can do as a family, do your own flowers, do your own catering, etc. But those are not the big costs. So, those big ones are really hard to avoid.
Are funeral directors making too much?
I don't think so. In fact, a lot of our members are carrying a lot of cost for our families. So we've got funeral directors who are accepting drip payments for funeral services that they've done from years back, because that's all the family could afford to do. And it's getting pretty hard for them to cover the costs with the increasing costs that they've got as well.
Really appreciate your time, Gillian. That's Gillian Boyes, who's from the Funeral Directors Association. They say there's a cost of dying crisis. It is 24 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think of funeral costs or cremation costs. The grant there from Work and Income that you can get is only $2,445. Funeral Directors Association says doesn't come close to covering the costs. I mean, who's clipping the ticket here? What do you make of the costs? And also, speaking of cost crises, the Reserve Bank has raised the official cash rate. What does that mean for you and your whānau and your mortgage? 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie's waiting patiently with the headlines. Ko Evie, anō tēnā.
Kia ora, Lisa. Nationals Nicola Willis and Finance Minister Grant Robertson have clashed over the latest interest rate rise. The Reserve Bank's upped the official cash rate by 50 basis points to 5.25%, more than had been expected. Ms Willis says it's a punch in the guts. Mr Robertson says the government is helping the lowest earners. Donald Trump has gone on the attack after being charged in a New York court with 34 counts of falsifying business records. The former US president has demanded the resignation of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who brought the charges, and accused the judge, New York Supreme Court Judge Juan Merchan, of being anti-Trump. One of the two unions representing primary school principals has accepted a $4,000 pay rise this year and a 3% increase next year. The primary principals collective bargaining union represents about 15% of primary principals. The Funeral Directors Association says some low-income families are having to go into debt so they can bury their loved ones. Chief Executive Gillian Boyes says the Work and Income funeral grant of nearly $2,500 needs to be increased. And Broadcasting Minister Willie Jackson says he isn't concerned about RNZ's treatment of Māori staff. Cabinet Minister Kitty Allen apologised yesterday after urging RNZ to reflect on why it was failing to retain Māori talent. She'd spoken during a farewell for her fiancé, Mani Dunlop, who presented Midday Report. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland City, there's been a 6-car crash on Mount Eden Road near the corner of Perry Road. Emergency services are at the scene. And further south at Pokeno, a truck crash after 2 o'clock this afternoon southbound on State Highway 1's Waikato Expressway after the State Highway 2 interchange has been causing delays. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 5:40.
Kia ora rā, Eho. And we are just going to cross now to Parliament, where former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is beginning her valedictory speech.
Marae e tā koto ana tina koroa. E ne māte maha, haere, haere, haere. Nā tangata whenua o tēnei rohi o te whanganui atara. Tēnā koutou. Tātou nā kānohi ore he hui mai ana, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Mr. Speaker, when it came time to pen these words, my father suggested that I go back and look at the first ones I shared in this House. I remember writing my maiden speech so well. I was 28 years old. My family were living overseas and I'd only moved back to New Zealand a few months prior. If I'm honest, I was probably more than a little shocked to be here. A feeling that even after 15 years never quite left me. But the reasons I came here, they never left me either. They're all there in my maiden speech. Climate change, child poverty, inequality. I am, after all, a conviction-based politician. And I've always believed this to be a place where you can make a difference. I leave knowing that to be true. But despite that, I've become used to my time as Prime Minister being distilled down into a different list. A domestic terror attack, a volcanic eruption, a pandemic. A series of events where I found myself in people's lives during their most grief-stricken or traumatic moments. Their stories and phases remain etched in my mind and likely will forever. That is the responsibility and privilege of the role of Prime Minister. A role I never thought I was meant to have. It's fair to say that 2017 involved a surprising chain of events. At the beginning of the year, David Shearer announced that he would be leaving the opposition benches and Parliament for Sudan. It was remarked upon at the time that this was apparently a more appealing prospect than being in opposition. I found myself in a by-election for Mount Albert and soon after that as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. But that was just the half of it. It was the 1st of August and we were a mere 7 weeks out from an election when Andrew Little stood down as leader of the Labour Party and nominated me to take his place. I've always found it hard to explain what that period felt like. It was a cross between a sense of duty to steer a moving freight train and being hit by one. And that's probably because my internal reluctance to lead was matched only by a huge sense of responsibility. Andrew, I likewise know that you made your decision with that same sense of responsibility. And while I have never known whether to curse you or thank you, I'm grateful for the faith you always had in me. The 7-week campaign that followed was frenetic. Mike Jaspers, my chief press secretary at the time, recently reminded me that a week into the job, after a very long day, I fell asleep on a plane, woke up with a start, and asked him if I was still the leader of the Labour Party. Those few short weeks were also a blessing. There was no time to be anything but myself. And I also had the chance to be involved in everything. A real treat for a control freak. I remember sitting at my desk in the home that Clark and I shared in Auckland, writing a campaign launch speech. I knew I wanted climate change to be front and centre because I believed it would define our generation of politicians. I called it our nuclear-free moment. I believed it then and I believe it even more now. When I came here 15 years ago, we talked about climate change as if it were almost a hypothetical. Some didn't even give it that credit. In 2008, I sat in that lobby as the ETS was weakened and the yo-yo of climate policy continued. But in the intervening years, we have seen firsthand the reality of our changing environment, from Northland to Coromandel, Tokomaru Bay to Bulla, and I've seen the people it's impacted. Like the elderly couple on the West Coast who had lived in their home for their entire married lives. They'd only recently returned to it after a year's worth of post-flooding repairs when it was flooded again. We're too old to keep doing this, they told me. They've not returned to their home. Now, I know there is politics in almost everything. This chamber understands why more than anyone, but we also know when and how to remove it. When crisis has landed in front of us, I have seen the best of this place. An absolute focus on the care of others, on preserving life and helping people when they need it most. Climate change is a crisis. It is upon us. And so one of the very few things I will ask of this House on my departure is that you please take the politics out of climate change. There will always be policy differences, but beneath that we have what we need to make the progress we must. We have not just a credible but an ambitious NDC to reduce our net emissions by 50% by 2030. We have the Zero Carbon Act, carbon budgets, an emissions reduction plan, and a climate commission to guide us. We have business on board and the primary sector working hard on a shared set of goals, and it's making a difference. We're starting to see our emissions come down, with total greenhouse gas emissions falling to their lowest levels in 8 years. But New Zealand needs this place to provide them with certainty that you will keep going. So do. We owe it to the next generation, but we also owe it to ourselves. To the Green Party, especially James and Marama, I've enjoyed working with you immensely, and I've seen how tireless you both are, even when you're thrown into your own party processes that from the outside look something akin to the Squid Games. Thank you for the personal support I have felt from both of you. A friend of mine taught me early on in politics that there is no point looking back in anger, and I feel no need to when there are so many things I feel proud of. Things that I know are different or better because we had a Labour government. Like our work to uphold the treaty by crossing the bridge more often. The creation of the Māori Crown Relations portfolio under the excellent leadership of Calvin Davis. Thank you, Calvin. The stewardship of Te Arawhiti. The establishment of the Māori Health Authority. The growth of Te Reo Māori. The evolution of how we see ourselves as a nation through the teaching of New Zealand history in schools and the creation of Matariki, our first Indigenous public holiday. Yeah. The path we travel as a nation will not be linear, and it won't always be easy. But for the part of the trail that I had the privilege of leading, I'm glad we took on the hilly bits. It's fair to say that all told, we had a few mountains to climb though. I always wanted to be part of a government that had a focus on children. I can't exactly pinpoint the origins of that passion, but I've talked many times of the distinct memories I have of children in poverty during the 1980s. And so it was with much excitement that I was lucky enough to take on the role of the children's spokesperson from Annette King while in opposition. Annette had already done a huge amount of policy work, a trait of Annette's that she was well renowned for, almost as much as her relentless attempts to set single people up. But there was still space for further child poverty initiatives, so we got to work creating policy that was ready to be rolled out in their first 100 days of office, including the Child Poverty Reduction Act. In 2017, when we first formed government, almost 1 in 5 children were living in poverty. Most child poverty measures in New Zealand were going backwards. Now, I am not here to say that everything is perfect now. It is not. But the healthy home standards, the increases in benefits and their indexation to wages, the winter energy payment, introduction of Best Start and the creation of food in schools means that as I leave, despite the severe economic conditions, there are 77,000 fewer children living in low-income households. All 9 child poverty measures have reduced, and this winter, a sole parent will receive $212 more per week than when we came into office. But now, you just need to keep going. Someone asked me recently whether there were things I wish I'd managed to finish. There were definitely projects I would have liked to have seen through. You know, projects like the restoration of the St. James or the beginning and completion of Tokelau's airstrip. A project I felt strongly about after visiting this beautiful but remote realm country. I know if they'd told me in advance that visiting Tokelau in the absence of a place to dock would instead mean climbing onto what looked like an IRB whilst it's hanging over the side of a moving ship and then being dropped into the ocean by a very qualified, I'm sure, but very young-looking sailor, all while straddling what looks and feels like a unicycle seat whilst wearing a pulatasi, I would absolutely still have gone. I just would have worn bike pants. But aside from such projects, there were very few things I aspired to do in politics that have a natural end point. Poverty, inequality, ending environmental degradation. If you ever claim it's job done on those issues, you set the bar too low. Politics has never been a tick list for me. It's always been about progress. Sometimes you can measure it and sometimes you can't. We won't ever know the long-term benefits of banning conversion therapy, especially for our young people, or what it means to our Pacific communities that we finally apologise for the Dawn raids. There will be no list of the lives saved because of the banning of military-style semi-automatic weapons. We won't know how we left women feeling about the ability to make their own choices when this Parliament decriminalised abortion, or when we improved pay equity, put period products into schools, or reached 50% representation of women in Parliament. And while these things may not feature heavily in the history books when they write about the years 2017 to 2023, which will likely be a very heavy few chapters, they are still nonetheless things I feel very proud of.
And we're leaving that speech now by former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern giving her valedictory speech there in Parliament, referencing her maiden speech, which she gave at the age of 28 years old. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do get in touch. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie is here with the headlines. Anea Evie, mina pitipita kōrero.
In her valedictory speech, former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she bows out knowing that Parliament remains a place where a person can make a difference. She's also urged MPs to take the politics out of climate change. Ms Ardern will formally cease to be an MP on April 15. Westpac's chief economist Kelly Eckholt says today's bigger-than-expected rate rise was probably always part of the Reserve Bank's anti-inflation strategy. The bank's upped the official cash rate to 5.25%, a rise of 50 basis points, double what had generally been expected. Kelly Eckholt expects a further 25 basis point hike in May. The Health Minister, Dr Aisha Verrall, says she's extremely concerned about the deaths of 3 babies from whooping cough. The government has asked doctors and midwives to make vaccinating pregnant women an immediate priority amid suspicions of undetected community transmission. Legislation tightening up online child predator laws has passed its final reading in Parliament. The Crimes Act currently dictates that to have committed an offence, defendants must meet the young person they've targeted. Soon it will be just as illegal for adults to lie about their age or identity to meet a minor or communicate with them with the intent to cause harm. And Bluebridge has cancelled sailings of its Strait Feronia vessel for the 3rd day in a row with engineering issues, and it's not known if it will sail fail tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Inter-Islanders Kaitaki has been out of service for more than a month with a faulty gearbox. Those are the headlines. In traffic news, emergency services are on site in Mount Eden Road in Auckland City near the corner of Perry Road. There's been a report 6 cars have crashed and commuters are asked to avoid the area. Our full bulletin is at the top of the hour at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. It is time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Giles Beckford, who is joining us live from our Wellington studio. Well, Giles, surprise! The RBNZ springs one on pretty much everybody, eh?
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Yes, well, this is why they invented economists, of course, to make astrologers look good. But it would be fair to say that people are generally a bit bamboozled. As we heard from Kelly Eckold in the headlines there, he thought, look, this was always part of the game plan. Back in February, they had a path for interest rates going up to at least 5.5%. And really, in their view, not much had changed with the economy. So, they're just pressing on regardless. Now, some other commentators, I'll bring you one from Bancorp, which is a specialist financial services firm. They said today will go down in history of the Reserve Bank, the first time that it drove the New Zealand economy headfirst into recession. And there's a general feeling amongst some of the commentators that, in fact, the Reserve Bank didn't need to do this, certainly didn't need to do 50 basis points. 25 would have been adequate. But there are those who say, well, look, it's a shot across the bows of financial markets. Interest rates have been coming down, and the concern of the Reserve Bank is that that would undermine the inflation fight and the progress it's made so far. So wholesale interest rates went up as a result of today's decision. It's also an admission that perhaps the stronger inflation impulse after the cyclone and the floods, they've now got a better handle on it. In the next 3 weeks or so, we'll get inflation numbers, we'll get employment numbers, we'll have the government budget as well. So the path, the future look ahead will be slightly clearer for the Reserve Bank. Interestingly, they didn't say, as they had done in the past, further rate rises will be necessary, although everybody's rushing to add at least 25 basis points rise in May. So the people at Infometrics actually just said, to hell with it, we're going 575 by the middle of the year as the peak for the cash rate. We'll wait and see on that one, but by and large, yes, they did surprise us all. Perhaps the only crumb of comfort that there might be for borrowers is the suggestion that much of this has been baked into rates already, to the retail borrowing rates already, and therefore homeowners, those with mortgages, might not feel another dose of pain. We'll wait and see on that one. It certainly upended financial markets. The New Zealand dollar got a shot in the arm from that one. The expectation is higher rates means the Kiwi dollar will be in demand, so it hit 63.5 US cents, 94.1 Australian, and it upended the share market, which had been modestly positive for much of the morning. Once the decision was out, the top 50 index falling 32 points. That's about 0.25%, 11,867. And as I say, those wholesale interest rates also went up, double figures for some of them.
Thank you, Giles. That is Giles Beckford joining us live from our Wellington studio. New Zealand Rugby has released a 10-year plan for women and girls rugby with some ambitious targets for getting more females engaged in the game. Players, referees, board members and fans are among the areas that NZR want to boost over the next decade. We're joined by our sports reporter Felicity Reid. So Felicity, what are some of the highlights of the plan?
Well, something that will grab some of the headlines is that New Zealand Rugby is doubling their financial investment in women's rugby this year. So that's nearly $22 million, and that's just for 2023. So that investment will kickstart this 10-year strategy plan, which they've broken down into 5 key areas: culture, system, participation, performance and transitions. But that really just boils down to a plan for New Zealand Rugby to get and keep more women in the game. So that's at all levels of the game, and it's about making it more inclusive and fit for purpose in the way that they're going to do that. I think also we should probably mention that there is a commitment in there to reach the 40% female representation on the New Zealand Rugby Board. They are the only major sport in New Zealand which currently doesn't reach that threshold, and they're saying that they're going to push that out to their provincial union boards and to clubs as well. Again, that's quite an ambitious target, but they've got 10 years, I guess, to be doing this as well. And There are around 2,000 people that, men and women, from high performance, grassroots, players, coaches, administrators, which all contributed to the strategy plan. And so we can hear from New Zealand's head of women's rugby, Claire Beard, about what she had to say about the involvement of women in the plan.
It's about every level of the game changing and shifting so that the experience, the conversations, the club rooms, changing room upgrades, everything, it continues to have a women's lens at those discussions.
And Claire Beard says that having those women's voices gives her confidence that this strategy plan is actually going to be the right one and that women are going to have their voice at the centre of it as we move forward over the next 10 years.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid, sports reporter there. Don't get hot, cross and do your bun if you're on a roadie this long weekend, because Waka Kotahi is warning there will be delays. Easter weekend and school holidays to boot means potentially thousands on the move over the next couple of weeks, but that's complicated by a network severely compromised by cyclone damage, including the indefinite closure of State Highway 25A on the Coromandel. Waka Kotahi's Rob Campbell is asking people to be patient.
The roads are becoming open all over the country, and we would love people to get out and enjoy getting to see friends and whānau. But please expect some congestion. We have congestion on all of these long weekends at this time of year. But obviously those areas that have been affected by the cyclone will have another level of disruption on there. We're not going to be aware of that. The best place to find out the travel information for their journeys in their particular region is on our website, our Journeys website. It's at www.journeys.nzta.govt.nz, and there you can search for where you're going and what you can expect to see on the roads at that time.
Yeah, this holiday planner tool is quite nifty in that you can punch in your destination and it will give you an idea of the worst times to travel there. Is that right, Rob?
Absolutely, yeah, and it is based on previous year's information. So obviously in those areas of the cyclone, that might be slightly different this year, but it still gives you a really good idea of when the busy times are, where the hot spots are, so you can plan your journey and know what to expect.
I put in an example of State Highway 25 to Tairua, and tomorrow it says it's going to be busy, really busy, from 12:30 lunchtime until 8 p.m. at night. So what's your advice to people if they look at the journey and they see, wow, hey, I was going to go at that time?
Oh, look, if you possibly can, choose a different time. Now, we appreciate that's not always possible, but if you can avoid those peak times, then do so. But obviously, if not, just be prepared for it. Have plenty of water, be patient. Expect that it's going to take longer, enjoy the drive, stop off a few times, make sure you've got water and things to do for your kids, things like that. Because reality is it is going to be busy and there will be delays. And of course, as I say, that's based on last year. And we know we have some areas that there are traffic management in place and down to single lanes in some cases, which is going to add to that, unfortunately. We're really sorry about it, but we want people to be aware so they can plan for it. Yeah, tell us which are some of the pinch points, please, that there's still considerable work or damage. Well, if we think about the Coromandel in particular, State Highway 25A is closed and will be for some time, unfortunately. The rest of State Highway 25 is open, but we've got particularly at a site at Opatiri, there's a slip there. We're down to one lane. The road's open to all light vehicles, and that includes caravans and people with their boats. But we will have a lane, we will have traffic management there, and there's likely to be delays. A number of other places we do have small areas that are going to have a single lane and stop go. Then they're on quieter areas and probably have less effect, but they are there. And there's about 20 odd sites that are in that sort of state. So all those will add up, and our Journey website will tell you where they are. Rob, any idea of how long people may be waiting in a queue for on stop goes? It's really difficult to predict, and it depends on those particular sites and the volumes. But I could predict it would be potentially half an hour at times to get through there. And we just ask people to be patient, and particularly the people who are controlling the stop go, they can't alter that. They're just there to try and make sure we get there safely, and to make sure we don't get gridlock, that people can still continue to go through. Rob, are you worried about people's tolerance levels? I mean, how have your staff been treated so far in some of those areas where they are operating stop-go and people in hot cars may have to wait? Yeah, we are worried about tolerance levels, to be fair, and we understand the frustration. Look, most people are brilliant. Most people really appreciate that the people on the road are just trying to do their job and do it in the best way they can. We do get, unfortunately, a very small number of people who can be quite abusive, and that's really upsetting for our staff. They're just there doing their job. Many of them are locals. Many of them are affected by these traffic management themselves, and so they understand the frustration, and they're just doing the best they can. So we just ask people to be really mindful of that, and that the people on the road, they're doing their job, but they're not able to get everybody through any better.
And that's Rob Campbell from Waka Kotahi. A hard-hit West Auckland community is split over whether road access should be reinstated to visitors in time for Easter. Piha is still grappling with the aftermath of Cyclone Gabrielle. While some are wanting to ease restrictions to the settlement, there are those who think it's still too soon. Finn Blackwell reports.
8 weeks on from the storm, and Cyclone Gabrielle's footprint is still on display in Piha. With roadworks and red-stickered houses lining the streets, residents are saying there's work to be done across town. Piha Surf School founder Phil Wallace says it's too early to be welcoming people back.
The council have been tied up doing so many different things that they haven't even got to repair so much of the damage here. I personally, even though we'd like to earn more money, we'd like to have our business running at full throttle, I just don't see how the community can handle it.
He says security is still on everyone's mind.
Having all these empty houses, we're still on the back end of a disaster, and my big question would be what's going to happen come night time.
Mr. Wallace says council should be listening to the experts when deciding how long to keep restrictions in place.
We've got a lot of hysteria happening on Facebook because I think a lot of people think that's the only place they can vent their opinions, but Facebook doesn't deal with the logistics. It's got to be left to the experts.
Something West Auckland councillor Shane Henderson is making sure of.
I've got to follow the advice of particularly transport engineers and geotech engineers around whether we can safely encourage people into Piha. There's a time for politics and a time where we sort of rely on the engineers and the people to tell us whether it's safe to encourage people back in.
He says while geotech engineers wait for more data to come back, restrictions will remain in place. The council will reassess where things are at after Easter. But business owners like Fiona Anderson from the Piha campground say they can't cope much longer without customers.
Businesses out there are all slowly going broke, and I understand that they need the business, but I think it would be a mistake to just go open slather. I haven't been given the go-ahead to accept campers for the weekend. That's still being considered 2 days out. I've lost 100 bookings because people just can't wait anymore.
She says there's still so much uncertainty around how long it'll be before people come back.
We have to sit and wait and just everybody calm down. But in the meantime, I'd certainly like some certainty about when I can earn money again. I've had 8 weeks with no income.
And Piha surf shop owner Mike Jolly says while he can see the need for business, there are still slips that need securing.
As much as I am missing my customers, I do think that it's important that the main road in to Piha, and it's got other slips on it.
For now, it'll only be the Easter Bunny making his way to Piha this long weekend.
Finn Blackwell reporting there. The sign said "No mai haere mai, Cindy," and 1980s pop icon Cyndi Lauper embraced the hospitality, calling into Dunedin's Woof Bar, which happens to be co-owned by super fan Josh Thomas and Dudley Benson. The Time After Time star is performing tonight. As if that wasn't enough excitement for Dudley and Josh, who has still got his Cyndi Lauper journal from his teens. They were positively oozing with excitement when we caught up with them both post-pop star pop-in.
She was very gentle and very contemplative. She was very curious, very focused on art and her music. And so she was way more down to earth than I thought, actually. I mean, who knows what to expect, right? I've been in love with her since I was 14 years old, which is a long time ago. And, you imagine what this person you're in love with might be like.
You build them up in your head,
You
and
do.
then they turn up at your bar, and there is the possibility that they might not meet your expectations.
Yeah, no, she was just gorgeous. Really lovely human.
I thought it was interesting too. I was surprised by her New York coolness. Like, I don't know that she smiled at all the whole time. And she certainly didn't take off her purple tinted sunglasses. She was in a black fitted suit, silver jewellery. It was just, she was very New York, but you could tell so happy to be here.
And what did she say? I mean, what do you chat to Cindy about?
She asked about Dunedin. She had seen a bit of it coming in. I don't know how she arrived, but she got the impression maybe it was a working class town. So she was really intrigued by that. And I said she was like, what do people do here for work? And so, we kind of tried to give her a bit of that.
Hey, at what point did you bring out the special book, which I'd like you to bring out now, please? I mean, what do? Hi, Cindy, check this out.
There it is. This one's particularly hilarious. Cyndi Lauper, what a woman.
So this is, for people who aren't watching, who are just listening, this is what? Is it a journal? Is it a scrapbook? How would you describe it, please?
It's a bit of both. I used to call them logbooks. They're kind of a bit scrapbooky, bit collagey, but then there's quite a lot of diary entries in there as well. So it's just a bit of everything of my life at that time.
And it's amazing, Lisa, because it's not only full of Cyndi Lauper, it's full of a 14-year-old's perspective of the Springbok Tour and anti-nuclear, Aotearoa, the Rainbow Warrior, and Cyndi Lauper.
And Cyndi Lauper. Did you write things about Cyndi Lauper in that book?
I haven't had a chance to read through it. Other people have been reading it more than me, but I haven't had a chance. I'm sure there's quite a few mentions in there.
Can you just sort of open it up? Is there an extract or a particular piece of art that we can look at there? Okay, couple of pictures with the red hair, because that's the first thing I noticed. She hasn't got the red hair anymore, right? So
yeah, that signature hair has evolved. It's pink now?
Yeah, pinky purple. And what, Lisa, you may not know, well, no one knows, but I'm telling you now, is that Josh looked like Cyndi Lauper. When he was 14 and she was in this girls just want to have fun era, he looked just like her. He had the round face with the puppy fat and the dreadlocks, and he wore this same kind of scrappy
I actually did do an impersonation of her at high school.
Oh, can you give us a demo? Can you please give us a demo? Come on.
There are limits, Lisa. There are limits.
What did she think of the book?
She loved it, but I could see, like, in the nicest possible way, no offense to myself, I could see she gets a lot of this, I mean, she's such a megastar and she's influenced and inspired so many people around the world. So I could see maybe she hasn't seen a scrapbook like this, and she did seem intrigued by it. But I could see she was also like, yep, lovely.
Your scrapbook's special. It's special to us. Okay, so we've heard Dudley's favourite song. Josh, what's yours, please?
Well, it is from All Through the Night from She's So Unusual.
Okay, you wouldn't give us just a few bars of it before you head off?
All through the night. So beautiful. That was beautiful.
Hey, you guys are going to have a fantastic night tonight, eh?
Yeah, for sure.
And there'll be something else. Maybe you could put a new entry into the book after tonight.
Yeah, I can't quite believe it's happened.
Utterly delightful. Josh Thomas and Dudley Benson there interviewing them at Wolf Bar in Dunedin. Got to see Cyndi Lauper. And I'm wondering, Te Papa might want that journal.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, good evening, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has delivered her final speech in Parliament, leaving parties with a parting wish they take the politics out of climate action. Ms Ardern is bowing out of politics after 14 years as an MP, 5.5 in the top job. In her valedictory speech, she spoke about entering politics at 28 years old and her ambitions to make progress on child poverty and climate change. Cloaked in a korowai, Ms Ardern asked her colleagues to keep working at climate change.
One of the very few things I will ask of this House on my departure is that you please Take the politics out of climate change. There will always be policy differences, but beneath that we have what we need to make the progress we must.
Jacinda Ardern has been appointed as New Zealand's top representative for the Christchurch call. The Reserve Bank's bigger than expected rate rise today was probably always part of their anti-inflation strategy, according to one economist. The RBNZ surprised with a 50 basis point rise in the official cash rate to 5.25%, double what economists had generally been expecting. The bank repeated inflation is too high and the recent floods would boost prices, while recent falls in wholesale rates are a new threat. Westpac's chief economist, Kelly Eckhold, says the RBNZ's decision fits the plan to hit 5.5%, signalled in February.
They're seeing this move as getting them there as quickly as possible to be able to sustainably bring down inflationary pressures.
Kelly Eckhold expects a further 25 basis point hike in May. One of two unions representing primary school principals has accepted a pay offer the other has rejected. The Primary Principals Collective Bargaining Union has agreed to a $4,000 pay rise this year and a 3% increase next year. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The union was created by the Principals Federation 18 months ago because it wasn't happy with the Educational Institute's representation of principals. The union says about 15% of primary schools' principals are members, and it has been bargaining with the Education Ministry independently of the larger union. The agreement it ratified today is similar to that accepted by secondary principals, who are also represented by two unions, the PPTA and the Secondary Principals Association Union.
The death toll from a severe earthquake in Papua New Guinea has reportedly risen to 7, with dozens more people injured and hundreds left homeless. The quake, a magnitude 7, struck early on Monday at a depth of 63 kilometres in the remote Chombre Lake region of East Sepik province. The National Disaster Centre is waiting for more details from provincial disaster coordinators. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says he considers Kitty Allen's apology regarding her criticisms of RNZ to be the end of the matter. Ms Allen, who's a cabinet minister, yesterday admitted she was wrong to question RNZ's treatment of Māori staff during a farewell for her fiancé, Mani Dunlop. Mr Hipkins says it would have been better if Ms Allen hadn't spoken at the event, but he accepts it's challenging to navigate matters involving family.
Other than 2 or 3 sentences, which could have been seen as a veiled criticism of RNZ's management, the rest of it was someone speaking lovingly about their partner. That's absolutely fine.
The Broadcasting Minister, Willie Jackson, says he's comfortable with RNZ's commitment to Māori. A business owner from a cyclone-hit Auckland coastal settlement says local shops won't survive much longer without customers. Access to piha has been restricted to residents only since Cyclone Gabrielle battered the region 2 months ago. Fiona Anderson runs the Piha Domain camp. She says there's still so much uncertainty around how long it'll be before customers come back. Ms Anderson worries there won't be enough funds for businesses to survive the winter. And a crash in Auckland has blocked a major road and damaged at least 6 cars. Part of Mount Eden Road is closed in both directions after a crash involving multiple vehicles just after 5 o'clock this evening. A person living nearby says it's the worst crash they've seen on the road in the past 20 years. Police say at least 1 person is seriously injured and 4 ambulances were on the scene. Multiple police and fire crews are still at the scene where debris has been scattered across the road. Diversions are in place and motorists are encouraged to avoid the area. That's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan in our series on New Zealand sports history, Laurie Mains talks about the 1995 Rugby World Cup and the waitress called Susie. 31 of the New Zealand party became ill just 48 hours before the big final at Ellis Park in Johannesburg, and Laurie blames Susie, though many South Africans are convinced the waitress was invented as an excuse for losing the final. We'll hear the uncensored story on Afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday for Northland. Fine today, scattered rain tomorrow, possibly heavy in the north. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, mostly fine. A few spots of rain tomorrow evening. Waikato and from Bay of Plenty to Kapiti, including the central high country. Also for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly fine, with increasing cloud tomorrow, but isolated showers in the west from Waipomo to Kapiti. Wellington and Wairarapa, mostly fine. Scattered showers developing tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls about Westland and Fiordland, and thunderstorms possible today, but only a few showers about Bulla. Rain or showers clearing by tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with scattered rain developing, but only a morning shower or two about Nelson. Otago and Southland, showers spreading north this evening, then clearing from central Otago tomorrow, and Chatham Islands, a few showers. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The central bank's taken the fire hose to the inflation fight, blasting the market with a higher rate rise than expected. The RBNZ has gone with a 50 basis point increase, taking the OCR to 5.25%, surprising economists and the market. It means a belt tightening exercise is on the way for mortgage holders as demand continues to outstrip supply. Kiwibank's chief economist, Jared Kerr, joins us now. Kia ora, Jared. Is this a bloody nose for mortgage holders or not?
Yeah, it is. We'd seen wholesale rates decline, and there was a chance that mortgage rates would have started to ease off from today, but the Reserve Bank is on the warpath. They've come out very clear in their intent that they want mortgage rates to be higher, and that's what we're going to get.
You had said stop, please, at, what was it, 5%?
Yeah, we thought a lift to 5% today would be enough.
So why do you think this is a mistake?
I think we've seen enough in the economic numbers locally to see a significant slowdown in economic growth over the next 6 months. We've seen it in our credit card data. We saw it in the GDP numbers to end last year. We're on a much weaker footing coming into this year. We think we've just seen enough locally, and offshore there's a lot of turbulence in financial markets, and there are likely to be recessions in countries like the United States, Europe and parts of Asia. So the world is slowing down, New Zealand is slowing down, and I think we risk over-tightening here.
So if you can see it, why can't the Reserve Bank and the Reserve Bank Governor see it?
Well, they acknowledge the slowdown, but they're more worried about inflation than we are. They think inflation is going to prove to be too sticky for too long, and they judge the rebuild from the cyclones and the flooding to be more inflationary than we do.
And you touched on recession. Well, some economists are predicting this is going to push us into recession. Will it, or aren't we already there? We just don't know it by official numbers yet.
Well, we may already be there. We had a contraction in the fourth quarter of last year. We may get a contraction in the first quarter of this year, and most of us are forecasting some pretty ordinary numbers over the next couple of quarters. And it is by RBNZ design that the Reserve Bank is forecasting a recession on the back of their actions. They want a recession to kill inflation. The thing I'm worried about is that you can easily go too far, and recessions can be a lot deeper more quickly than anticipated.
So do you think the Reserve Bank is sentencing us to a deeper recession with the actions it has taken today?
Potentially, yeah. I think that, they're quite clear that they haven't finished today, for starters. They're going to tighten again. And I think that we will get, much weaker economic news as a result.
So where does this leave people with mortgages? Have mortgage rates topped out? Have banks already taken this into account, or are we going to see further rises?
I think we're going to see further rises in variable rates and short-term rates. I think the 2 to 5 year rates may hold around current levels because there's some cuts and stuff priced in out there. But the message, that we're receiving from the Reserve Bank is pretty clear. keep mortgage rates at least at these levels, if not higher, because they're wanting to squeeze consumption even further.
We get a lot of feedback on this program, and knowing this discussion was coming up, we're getting people texting in saying that the rise in the OCR is to ensure that banks keep their vulgar income, as one person says, nothing to do with inflation. Can the banks do anything in terms of easing this for mortgage holders?
Well, it's going to impact all interest rates. As we've seen today, the Reserve Bank's aggressive action has lifted all wholesale rates. We act as a spread to those wholesale rates, and when they increase, we have to pass those on to customers.
Good to talk to you, Jared. Thank you so much for your time. That's Jared Kerr, who's Kiwibank's chief economist. New Zealand's 40th Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has officially bowed out of political life, delivering her final address to Parliament. Her speech marks the end of 14 years as an MP, of which she spent about 5.5 years in the top job. She shocked the country with news of her retirement in January, saying she simply had no more gas in the tank. In the past hour, speaking to MPs, Ms Ardern reflected on her achievements in office, her legacy.
There were very few things I aspired to do in politics that have a natural end point. Poverty, inequality, ending environmental degradation. If you ever claim it's job done on those issues, you set the bar too low. Politics has never been a tick list for me. It's always been about progress. Sometimes you can measure it and sometimes you can't. We won't ever know the long-term benefits of banning conversion therapy, especially for our young people, or what it means to our Pacific communities that we finally apologise for the Dawn raids. There will be no list of the lives saved because of the banning of military-style semi-automatic weapons. We won't know how we left women feeling about the ability to make their own choices when this Parliament decriminalised abortion, or when we improved pay equity, put period products into schools, or reach 50% representation of women in Parliament. And while these things may not feature heavily in the history books when they write about the years 2017 to 2023, which will likely be a very heavy few chapters, they are still nonetheless things I feel very proud of.
Jacinda Ardern also spoke at length about the pandemic and about her response to the March 15th mosque shootings. But she also revealed some intimate details about her personality and her private life.
When I was 37 years old, I was told there are a range of factors that meant I hadn't been able to get pregnant, and stress was probably one of them. We decided to use the help of science, but as so many couples experience, that wasn't straightforward. I'd not long experienced a failed IVF round when I became leader of the Labour Party. I thought that I'd found myself on a path that meant I wouldn't be a mother. Rather than process that, I campaigned to become Prime Minister. A rather good distraction as far as they go. Imagine my surprise when a couple of months later I discovered I was pregnant. There is no question I've had incredible support to be the mother I wanted to be, from the office team who tried to get me home for story time, and Neve's Village who were there when I wasn't. But I leave knowing I was the best mother I could be. You can be that person, and you can be here. Now, I cannot determine what will define my time in this place, but I do hope I've demonstrated something else entirely, that you can be anxious, sensitive, kind, and wear your heart on your sleeve. You can be a mother or not. You can be an ex-Mormon or not. You can be a nerd, a crier, a hugger. You can be all of these things. And not only can you be here, you can lead just like me. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
And Jacinda Ardern has accepted roles as special envoy for the Christchurch Call and on the board of Prince William's Earthshot Prize. It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Donald Trump has railed against charges brought against him and in a fiery speech back home in Florida claimed he's the subject of a political witch hunt. In a historic court appearance in New York, the former US president pled not guilty to falsifying records frauds during the 2016 election and trying to hide a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. World Watch's Max Toll has this report on today's events.
President Trump, will you come speak to us? President Trump?
Shortly before 6:30 this morning, the former president walked into a Manhattan courtroom under arrest. Donald Trump seemed sombre and subdued and gave little away as the mostly procedural hearing took place. Upon being read the 34 counts against him, he replied not guilty. Outside court, his lawyer addressed a throng of reporters.
Here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the insufficiency of this case. And I will say this to you. Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country.
Relishing the moment, the man who brought this historic case against Donald Trump, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, stressed that no one is above the law.
Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements.
After the hour-long hearing ended, Donald Trump swiftly left the city, so tied to his own history and reputation, returning home to a celebratory atmosphere at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. In a provocative appearance, much like his rambling campaign speeches, a defiant Trump claimed to be a victim of relentless targeting by Democrats.
God bless you all. They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number 1. Impeachment hoax number 2. The illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-a-Lago, right here.
Donald Trump said his country was going to hell and that the world was laughing at America. As for the strength of the case against him, some of the top US legal experts differ on whether it will stand up in court. A former national security advisor to Mr. Trump, John Bolton, says it's easily subject to dismissal.
I'm extraordinarily distressed by this document. I think this is even weaker than I feared it would be. And I think it's easily subject to being dismissed or a quick acquittal for Trump.
The reaction of the American public to this saga has been predictably mixed. A recent CNN poll found 60% of Americans approve of the indictment, but more than 3/4 believe it is in some way politically motivated. Here were two varying opinions outside court in New York today.
Alvin Bragg doesn't realize he's the one who's going to be destroyed, not Trump, because now Alvin Bragg is fully exposed. You can't fool us New Yorkers about the crime here. We cannot be fooled.
I'm just happy to see some justice being done, and I know this is going to go down in history, and it's nice to know that no one's above the law.
The next hearing isn't scheduled until December the 4th, though it is possible Donald Trump's legal team will try to get that date brought forward. In the meantime, it's likely they'll try to get the charges thrown out for supposed lack of evidence. If the case does progress, a jury will eventually be selected, a trial will happen, and a unanimous verdict will be needed to convict a former president for the first time in US history.
Back home now, and one of the men at the centre of the standoff at Gore District Council was given a 2-year contract extension just days before a new council was picked. Chief Executive Stephen Parry is no longer on speaking terms with the new Mayor, Ben Bell, and both are now in place until 2025, when the next elections will be held. Timothy Brown explains.
Gore District Council Chief Executive Stephen Parry and Mayor Ben Bell have been in mediation since December, but their working relationship has broken down to the point the council has now appointed a go-between for the men. Multiple sources have told RNZ Mr Parry's contract as Chief Executive was due to expire in September this year. However, 2 days before the election, which saw 5 new councillors voted in and long-standing Mayor Tracy Hicks ousted, the previous council decided to extend that contract by the maximum 2 years. It means Mr Parry's contract is now in place until shortly before the next elections. Mr Hicks today defended that decision.
As
someone that's been around local government for a long time, I understand the complexities or I'm aware of the complexities that are coming at councils headlong at the moment, and having some stability there is, in my view, very important. And to be fair, where would we be now if we didn't have that stability?
In contrast, the neighbouring Invercargill City Council didn't take such a decision in the previous term. New Mayor Nobby Clark and the 5 new faces around his council table decided to appoint a new chief executive early in the term. Mr Hicks says that's also an approach his council could have taken last year.
Look, I understand the different councils, different challenges, different personalities. So I'm pretty comfortable with where we ended up.
The extension to Mr Perry's contract was also not publicly announced afterwards. Mr Hicks says that's an oversight due to proximity to the election.
I guess I wasn't involved after that for much longer, so that public announcement didn't occur, and look, that's as it is, but look, I stand by the decision the council made.
Mr Perry has served as the council's chief executive since 2001. Gore Mayor Ben Bell says a vote was taken on a number of key decisions during that meeting, which he finds disappointing. But he did not wish to discuss what occurred in committee at a meeting before he was on the council.
As for the decisions that may or may not have been made in that council meeting, I've always made it very clear that I'm willing to work with anyone. I said that when there was the reappointment of a deputy, that I'm happy to work with anyone. That same thing applies to staff and the chief executive. It's my duty as a professional to work with and continue to try to work with the chief executive in my role as mayor.
So what then of the breakdown in his relationship with Mr Perry?
I mean, relationships are a two-way street, absolutely, but actively trying to work on it.
Mr Bell will not be drawn on what he's doing to actively work on it, but he remains confident that he can work with Mr Perry for the next 2.5 years if Mr Perry wants to work with him. Ben Bell says the council is still working and it's business as usual for the services it provides to residents and ratepayers.
That report from Timothy Brown. A lot of feedback on funerals and the cost. You generally say they're too high and there are workarounds. This listener says people can do their own funerals and make their own coffins. Richard from Wellington says funerals can be done with love and respect by family and loved ones without the service of a funeral director. A vastly cheaper and more rewarding experience can be done for less than $1,500, he says. In fact, someone's got in touch to say they to cremate my late love cost about $400. No coffin, dressed him beautifully. They laid him on a wooden board and silver fern fronds around him from our garden, over his body too. Took him for cremation, then sometime later put his ashes where he chose in our garden. All tender and beautiful. And they say $400. Another person says DIY funeral for a friend. It was beautiful. And this one, deceased husband transported from home to a funeral home, cremated in a shroud the next day with no service, ashes picked up by the family, $5,500, says Ali from Napier. Thank you for your feedback. Live Aussie freshwater crayfish, or yabbies, and a sprouting onion are just 2 bits of contraband sniffed out by biosecurity at Auckland Airport in the past 3 months. The number of air passengers screened in the first quarter of this year is up well over 1,000% on the same time last year. That equates to almost 1.4 million people being screened. Mike Ingalls, Biosecurity New Zealand's Northern Regional Commissioner, reckons they've got enough staff to manage the huge jump in demand.
Yes, we do. I think we've been growing our workforce over the last 6 to 7 months, Lisa. You can tell by the numbers alongside other agencies in terms of opening the borders is extremely welcome. So we continue to recruit both in terms of the numbers. In fact, I've got a group of staff graduating tomorrow and we continue to manage that well while still maintaining our biosecurity focus.
So what are the wait times for people arriving at airports to get through biosecurity checks?
On average across the day, and that's just in the last period, on average across 24 hours with the measures that we have in line with the airport. From the MPI side, from our biosecurity side of the business, it's averaging about 13 minutes to get through the risk assessment, through express lane or X-ray. However, there are times, Lisa, where again with flight arrival times joining up, that some of those times are longer than that. And we continue to know that passenger facilitation and also the experience is important, but so is biosecurity. So we're continuing to review that with our partners in terms of the airport airlines to try and make sure that we continue to manage that, particularly in the busy periods.
So an average of 13 minutes, but what are your worst times for waits?
I think over the last period we've had an occasion where people have waited over 40 minutes in terms of that space, and for me that's a frustration for passengers that we're trying to limit across the board. But again, from our point of view, the focus is clearly on making sure when passengers arrive they understand in terms of what's expected of them when they arrive, what type of declared or non-declared items, to make sure that we get them processed and back through to the whānau as quick as possible.
How can you streamline that screening process so that you can separate out high-risk passengers from lower-risk passengers that may not need as much scrutiny?
Yeah, we do that at the moment. Over the last 4 or 5 months, we've obviously reintroduced the express lane with our dogs working in it. And as we stand today, the average is we're putting between 40 and 50% of passengers through that express lane. Again, from a risk assessment desk, we're only putting people to search areas in full search if they require it, under where they've came from country-wise or the type of goods they've got to be screened. And then the rest will obviously go through X-ray. One of the main things to say is our staff, again, I'm very proud of what our staff have done over the last period. We've also introduced, obviously, enhanced measures for foot and mouth disease with direct flights back from Bali. We've got plans in place to welcome the FIFA World Cup in terms of those process. But overall, all of this, we certainly need to maintain our focus on our biosecurity process, because the last thing we want is to make sure that we have an incursion of something that impacts the community or impacts our way of life.
Yeah, of course. Nobody wants something like that to be able to get into the country. But given you have had such an enormous increase in the number of air passengers that you're screening, is the discovery of contraband or risky items proportionate to that increase?
Yeah, I think overall, Lisa, when you weigh that up, when you look at the amount of, if we can put people down the express lane, then we certainly will, and that's based on our officers' experience and their competence. And as I said before, I'm extremely proud of what our officers do on behalf of New Zealand every single day. The other part of that is just making sure that we can continue to communicate. The vast majority of passengers coming in are compliant passengers across the piece. Again, some of what we find is just recently people bringing in live yabbies or freshwater crayfish, etc., into the airport. There's aspects of that could cause real risk. There's obviously brown marmorated stink bug, fruit fly in terms of fresh fruit. We've got to keep our focus, because even one item from a fruit fly, etc., getting into one of our regions or one of our communities would cause a lot of damage. We'd also include negate our trading aspects in terms of the economy, and also then affect horticulture and everything else that goes with that. So we get the balance right. There is occasions across the piece. We continue to look at it, Lisa, in terms of can we do something different, hence the reintroduction of the express lane. And we continue to do that on a daily basis to improve that for passengers, but also as a without repeating myself, the biosecurity focus needs to be balanced against passenger facilitation.
Mike Ingalls there, and Biosecurity New Zealand says it has between 12 and 18 vacancies at the moment. A quick bit of feedback before we head off for the evening. A lot of you getting in touch about the funerals, basically saying not happy with the fees that funeral directors are charging. Embalming of bodies isn't compulsory. A lot of you are saying that's a huge cost that can be cut out, and DIY funerals are fine. Our beloved dad won't need a funeral director or embalming. We're planning ahead, says that person. How maddening these exorbitant fees are only such by the virtue of funeral directors. If family does away with funeral directors, the cost can be lower. Our family managed to farewell both parents by cremation for under $1,000 each. That is all from us. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening, and tune in to First Up from 5 a.m. tomorrow. They'll ask Deputy Prime Minister Carmel Sepuloni how we can retain the thousands of nurses heading to Australia for better pay and conditions. So do tune in for that one, 5 a.m. tomorrow morning.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has urged MPs to take the politics out of climate action in her final speech to Parliament. She's to be New Zealand's top representative for the Christchurch Call, an international body working to remove extremist content from the internet. The Reserve Bank's raised the interest rate to 5.25% to help tackle rising inflation. Donald Trump's railed against 34 counts of falsifying business records. The ex-president says his only crime was to fearlessly defend the United States. And police say one person is